Alex McCarthy here, Tony Khan. I mean, you got so many titles, so many because you're the busiest man in history. But of course, AEW head honcho. I'm glad we finally got to do this, man. You know, it was Las Vegas 2019. I was there in the flesh for the first show. Was so awesome to see you there and the buzz and whatnot. I haven't been able to get back to America for various pandemic whatever reasons. Of course, the World Cup's on now. Otherwise, I'd be there this weekend. But, you know, Daily Mail got me working football, Tony. You know how that goes. Speaking of which, going pretty well for you, man, in all areas right now. That's got to be some buzz. Jacksonville over in London, Fulham doing top half of the Premier League, AEW pay-per-view week. Pretty good, right?
We're having a very, very exciting time right now, and it's Full Gear week in AEW. It's one of the biggest weeks of the year in AEW, one of the biggest weeks of the year in professional wrestling, and a lot of exciting things happening too. Like you said, very excited to have Fulham in the top half of the table and squads playing so hard, and now a lot of guys out in the World Cup, and can't wait till we come back from this break and keep fighting. Come on, Fulham.
Yeah, indeed, man. I'll touch back on that later because I've been so impressed with what you've done this summer, and you know, you really, like I said to you, man, it feels like you've really learned some lessons in the market, and the team's come such a long way. But let's talk about the other team, man. Let's talk about AEW right now. Full Gear week. I look at the card. I know we say this is almost redundant at this point, but such a stacked card once again. MJF Moxley at the top of it, though. I wanted to get into this because for a guy who's so meticulous, right? You've shown that you lay out stories in such a vivid fashion. You've had to pivot a lot this year, right? Like injuries and all of these different things that have happened that change plans. But here we are, red hot main event for the world title. Kind of feels poetic, right? Feels like it was meant to be. Was this always the plan for Full Gear, or are we just really lucky now? Like, do you know what I mean?
Well,
that it's all worked out.
It's worked out incredibly well. We've got an incredible main event, and this show headlined by Jon Moxley versus MJF for the AEW World Championship. It's stacked card from that top match through every match on the card. It is loaded. There's been so many exciting things happening in AEW recently on our TV. Of course, over in the UK, we just have set record ratings. And past few months, our records ratings through the roof. And it's, you know, with the great support of the fans in the UK and ITV and ITV4, amazing partners. And now here in America, going with Full Gear live on pay-per-view this week, headlined by Mox versus MJF. It's a huge match. And I have to say, the last few months, it's been building this direction. And really, I would say since Buffalo, it feels like this is probably the most stable TV crew we've had all year. And I love it. It's really gave us an opportunity when we reset some things going into the Grand Slam Tournament of Champions and crown new World Trios champions in Buffalo. And really looking at the roster at the time, I felt like, okay, now going into Grand Slam, into Toronto, of course, the 3-year anniversary show and Title Tuesday, a lot of great dynamites have happened in that time on the road to Full Gear. And now Full Gear, starting with Jon Moxley versus MJF for the World Championship. It's, I think, our best card of the year. And to me, it's been my favorite run of TV of the entire year too, including, like I said, some of those big shows, Grand Slam, our debut in Toronto, our 3-year anniversary show, Title Tuesday, a lot of great ones.
I got to tell you, MJF, like, again, I personally would love to see him arrive per se this week and win the title. I know a lot of people feel that way. The guy feels red hot right now from many, many perspectives. You know, it's great that you managed to get him back, frankly, right? Like, what did it take, Tony? And it must feel like money well spent right now when you've got this coming up.
Well, we had to work something out, and I think it has worked out really well for everyone. It's great for the fans to have MJF back in AEW, and for all of the TV and all the pay-per-views, MJF from the beginning of AEW has been a consistent player in the company. So I'm excited to have him here and in this big position, challenging Jon Moxley, who has been so consistent, steadfast throughout this year. Since he returned to pro wrestling at the beginning of 2022, he's come back probably better than ever. He's come back in the best condition, in the best focus and mindset, and with the best results. He's been a dominant competitor in AEW, and he's been a great world champion throughout this year. And now going into, I think, his toughest defense yet against MJF. And it's just a real clash of two of the best in the sport.
I'm glad you've waxed lyrical about John there, because he does really deserve it. He feels like he's been the backbone of AEW in many ways, it's particularly this year. But what do you think about the levels of MJF these past few weeks, month perhaps, right? Where a lot of critical acclaim, the promo with Regal, for instance, right? Even the one he did last week on the podcast, I believe it was Barstool. Incredible work. Like, what do you? Is he at his apex right now? Is this the best you've seen him?
Yeah, I think this is the all-time peak of MJF, but it's a very young peak. He's a young man, a 26-year-old man, and he's got a very bright future ahead of him for sure. And he's stepping into the ring with somebody who is at the peak of this profession, the ultimate mountain to climb, Jon Moxley. And that's what pro wrestling is all about. These kinds of huge clashes between two of the best. And that's what I'm really looking forward to, is great fights, a lot of title fights, and a lot of personal situations being settled on Saturday night at Full Gear. And it's important to note the pay-per-view is Saturday night. I know people have gotten used to a lot of AEW pay-per-views on Sundays. This will be a Saturday night pay-per-view, and which is great for a lot of the fans in the UK, including yourself.
It is. Of course, technically that's Sunday morning if you want to, for us. But you're right. You are correct. It is a Saturday.
As opposed to Monday morning.
That's right. Exactly. And I know which one's better for me. So there you have it. But I mean, you talked about, the best weeks of TV and stuff coming out for AEW. Man, one thing that deserves a lot of praise, I think, is that you got 3 really good women's stories on this card, 3 matches. You've obviously dedicated time to that with, Britt Baker and Saraya. Jamie Hayter's red hot as well. I know I'm not saying that as a bias, Britt, but she comes into this title showdown with Toni Storm with a lot of momentum as well. And obviously Jade Cargill, Nyla Rose has been wildly entertaining as well. That must be satisfying to look at that, right?
Yeah, it's tremendous. We have great women's matches up and down the card, and that's something I've really been focused on again in the last few months through Grand Slam, the arrival of Saraya, and the real battle of words, and now a battle in the ring that we can't wait to see between Dr. Britt Baker and Saraya for the first time ever here in AEW. And as you said, a couple of huge title clashes. The interim women's world champion, Toni Storm, taking on Jamie Hayter. 2 of the most red hot wrestlers in all of AEW. Both of them have been on a real roll, and I think that's going to be a great match, and the fans are going to get excited for that one, I'm sure. And then, like you said, it's been very entertaining. 2 of the most dominant women's wrestlers in the world, Jade Cargill and Nyla Rose, 2 of the absolute most dominant competitors, not just in the women's division, but all of AEW. And I think that's going to be a great match. It's also been a bit of a personal situation in addition to a title rivalry there with Jade's personal property, the TBS championship being stolen. And Jade's had to go around and do all this press with a replica belt, and she's pretty pissed.
Can I ask, how did the wheels get turning with Saraya, right? Like, because I was there in New Orleans when she retired a few years ago. And obviously there's a lot that has to happen. You sign her, you obviously ostensibly, I guess, wanted her to wrestle with it. She has to get cleared. Does she come to you and she is cleared? Do you approach her? Like, tell me how that all came about, please.
Well, we were very interested to have her in AEW, and she was very optimistic she could get all the clearances and really gave me her word that she was going to be good to go. And to me, I didn't want to push her. I thought it was going to be great to have Saraya in AEW. And look, if she'd come back and said, I want to be here, I'm not sure I can wrestle with my injuries, I also would have said that this is still a great home for you. I think we'd love to have somebody, a star like Saraya, as a part of our wrestling company, a big wrestling star like you, even if you can't get in the ring. But I think it's worked out great, and this is the ideal scenario, this kind of a great match, and plans have really fallen into place the last few months to have a big match at Full Gear this weekend, like Dr. Britt Baker, DMD, versus Saraya.
How was that settled in backstage? Like, after coming up with the promos and stuff like that, has she adapted to life in AEW well? Do you know what I mean? Like, sometimes there's, I guess, a process for different people that are used to having, more, I don't want to just label it to the scripting, but I guess she would have had free reign to say what she wants with it?
Not exactly. I mean, you
to a
can't just,
degree.
but yeah, I mean, I think to build up her match, absolutely. There's a lot of latitude that you give the wrestlers. And I think she's going out and really generating a lot of interest in the match, but she's also getting a firsthand experience with our live crowd, which is different than other live crowds. And you can try things out. And I think for somebody who's come in and she's doing great for her first month, and she's got really awesome people in the locker room that want to help her, in addition to a lot of friends that are, people she's worked with in the past, people, in WWE that she worked with, and good personal friends who, can mentor her and give her support. She keeps getting more and more comfortable with AEW.
And I got to say as well, I mentioned at the top of this interview, you are the busiest man ever, with all the hats that you wear. How is it with Ring of Honor at this stage? When obviously we've got the 4-way on this card, which everyone's looking forward to. A crazy amount of talent involved there. Jericho, Guevara, Danielson, Castagnoli. Again, when that becomes like a weekly thing, which I think I've read is the hope, right? You get a TV show. Is that going to be you doing that as well, or are you going to delegate? It's got to be hard.
Yeah, I think it'll be great. We've done a few great Ring of Honor shows now, and I've really enjoyed working on them and building a multiverse that is connective between the companies with AEW and Ring of Honor, and also New Japan Pro Wrestling and some great international partners we work with. So the goal is to have a weekly Ring of Honor TV show. I hope that happens. And right now, we have a great partnership with Warner Brothers Discovery and the cable and satellite carriers putting out Ring of Honor pay-per-views. And this year has been, I would say, with just a couple events, I've only done 2 Ring of Honor shows, but we're already having probably the most successful year ever for Ring of Honor pay-per-view and live events on a per-date basis. So it's going to continue, I think, with a big final battle. It's a unique start time. It's actually very beneficial for the UK fans who want to order Final Battle, because we're putting a show on, doing a little bit of an experiment, doing it in what would be an afternoon start time locally in America, where the show's emanating from in Dallas. Mm-hmm. And with the time difference, you'll be able to watch the show, and it'll be a lot more fan friendly in some ways in the UK than some of the other pay-per-views we've done. Now it came about through a unique television scheduling thing I found, which is that December 10th is kind of a transitional period for college football. After the championship games, there's the Army-Navy game, but NFL doesn't really start running our Saturday games till the next week. So the pay-per-view calendar, there's a lot of really great stuff at night on December 10th, in my opinion, like that would be competitive stuff, like big UFC and boxing and things that you don't necessarily always want to go head to head with. So in this case, the afternoon looked like a great window locally, and also it presents a great opportunity internationally in Europe.
A couple of things on the UK there. I'll start with the TV deal that you just mentioned. Of course, I have the luxury of watching on Fight as well as ITV over here. Are there any prospects of perhaps going live with ITV at some point?
I think that would be great. And particularly if we get, can do events over in the UK, with ITV support, either on TV or on pay-per-view working together. I think there's a lot of great opportunities. And I can't wait to talk more about AEW coming over to the UK, first in 2023, but really I think going forward, it's a long-term initiative with the support we built over the years in the UK and the great audience and the great partnership with ITV.
Well, there has been murmurs, and it was spoken about on Dynamite last week, that you will be coming to the UK in 2023. I don't know how much you can or cannot reveal right now, but are we looking at like a big show? Is it a tour? What can we say?
Well, I can't say much yet. It's still something we're working on, and we're gonna roll out piece by piece. So I can't put all the information out, and I may not even have all the information yet, but I know we're doing it. So it's something that we're really pushing towards, and we're definitely gonna do in 2023 and beyond. Yeah, and can't wait to visit many parts of the UK in the long term, but in the short term, we're going to take a measured approach and try and make sure it's a big success when we do debut and it's something memorable.
Speaking of which, do you think at some point in the future, whether it be 2023 or not, could Craven Cottage host an AEW event?
I would love that. I would absolutely love that. I think it would be great. And if we could work it out, then yeah, I would love that.
There was obviously a lot of discussions after Jonathan Gresham dropped the title and him apparently not being happy with how things played out. But I have really enjoyed the story you've been doing with Jericho and the title, and it's led us to this star-studded, matchup. So I guess the first part is how, difficult was it to handle the Gresham situation and the transition of getting to where you needed to be? But B, how happy are you now with how the story's unfolded? And, it has been kind of cool on Jericho. I'm not going to lie.
Well, it's been a tremendous series of matches. Chris Jericho has brought a lot of attention to the Ring of Honor Championship, which is a belt with great lineage. Some of the best wrestlers in the world today and some of the best wrestlers of the last few decades have held that championship. And I think it's great to have Chris, who's now in his 8th reign as world champion, as the face of ROH right now. But on the other hand, there's some drawbacks because Chris is a rule breaker, and a lot of what Ring of Honor was built on, Chris is desecrated. So there's a lot of fans who'd like to see Chris lose the title, but they probably don't want to see Sammy win it. And so that's something that we'll have to, see in the 4-way match, because I think Claudio and Bryan Danielson representing Blackpool Combat Club, Chris Jericho and Sammy Guevara representing Jericho Appreciation Society, 4 of the best wrestlers in the world, 2 really popular, beloved fan favorites in Bryan Danielson and Claudio Castagnoli, who are both former Ring of Honor world champions. And in Bryan Danielson's case, he's one of the real faces, somebody who's historically associated with Ring of Honor. Independently, before I purchased the promotion, he was actually inducted into the Ring of Honor Hall of Fame. And the company's operated for about 20 years before I took over this year. And really, Bryan Danielson, I think, would be one of the people you would point to as one of the most successful champions ever in the company. Claudio Castagnoli this year won the championship. As you mentioned, he won it from Jonathan Gresham. He had some great matches as champion, great matches like Takeshita, I thought was an excellent title defense. I really loved his match against Dax Harwood on Rampage. And then Claudio versus Chris Jericho, a huge matchup at Grand Slam. And Chris ended up winning the Ring of Honor title. Now it's an interesting situation. Then you have Sammy Guevara, who, as I mentioned, a lot of the fans are not necessarily behind, but I am behind him. And I think he's one of the most exciting young wrestlers in the world. And even though he's not beloved or the most popular person, and even though he does things, says things, and really acts like a villain in pro wrestling, I think Sammy Guevara has one of the biggest hearts. And you go out and watch matches like what he did in that 2 out of 3 falls match with Bryan Danielson, and in their previous match too. They've had a couple great matches in the last month on Dynamite. And this past week, the 2 out of 3 falls match, there was a lot of great wrestling, but you also saw what Chris Jericho has instilled into Sammy as a rule breaker. And you see why the fans hate him so much when he goes out and comes in with what was a very legitimate strategy. He went in and attacked Bryan Danielson. It cost him a DQ fall, but then he got that fall back by taking the advantage and nearly won the entire thing. So I think you have to also keep Sammy in the mix here, although Chris has him in there to even up the numbers for himself, because he's taken on both of these great world champions, trying to knock out 2 title defenses. And I'm really excited for that match. And, I'm glad you asked about Ring of Honor. I think the company's having a great year, and it'll be very interesting to see where this leads going into Final Battle.
And I'm glad you brought up Sammy in a bit of detail there as well. Like, obviously, he makes all kinds of headlines, but the guy is ultra talented. Does that ever frustrate you, kind of like the perception at times, or the fact that he seems to get into these conflicts?
Now, the thing I really appreciate is he works really hard, and whether the fans love him or not, he works really hard for them and has great matches.
He does.
And he's had some of the best in AEW, I think, in the past year. And you can add the 2 out of 3 falls match near the top of that great list. I think of some of the awesome matches Sammy's been involved in, and I expect the 4-way match on Saturday at Full Gear will be another great match with Sammy, Chris Jericho, Claudio Castagnoli, and Bryan Danielson.
Just quickly to touch back on Gresham, do you kind of, it seems like you changed the infrastructure a little bit after that, right? Like you appointed different people in like kind of
every one of those people was in that room,
right?
So it didn't change any. So
I was just wondering
what were you about to say?
Well, I was just wondering if, like, it seemed like from reports.
What the infrastructure? You mean like with Sanjay and
yes,
Pat Buck, QT, Tony Schiavone?
Yeah.
Every one of those people was in that room.
Yeah, because he was citing lack of communication, right?
Well, I would disagree. I'm neither here nor there, but we got through it, and what I really appreciated was a great match, because I thought it was a great match, Claudio versus Jonathan Gresham, and great start to what was an excellent pay-per-view. So, and he's a great wrestler, Jonathan Gresham. He's been a great champion for Ring of Honor. I have a lot of respect for his wrestling, and really tremendous, I thought, pay-per-view. Also, Death Before Dishonor started with a great title change with Jonathan Gresham and Claudio Castagnoli, and it ended with a great match. What a great 2 out of 3 falls match, FTR versus the Briscoes. Oof. And what a great year both teams have had, and they've had those great matches on the Ring of Honor pay-per-views, and that's something you can really look forward to on those shows also.
This is the dumbest thing ever. And by the way, too, I had to call Tony Khan and say, dude, the belt got stolen. What? I feel like the biggest loser in the world. Here's Chris Jericho, your 28-year vet of the business, who knows how important it is to hold a title and never lose that title. And the first day I win the title, I lose that title.